Good afternoon. This quartet on my left and right stands between you and Beethoven. Let's see if they can pull or touch the strings harmoniously. I hope not, so that we have some conflicting evidence at this stage. The idea of this panel is to engage in a conversation, first among them, and then with you. I will start closing down towards 4:45, so that we can really leave here 5 o'clock, and that a few conversations can still happen in the hallway. The idea of this panel is to attempt a little bit of synthesis, to bring out selective hearing on what was important today, and again look to tomorrow. Mind you, tomorrow we are more focused on engaging diverse actors. A few more people will join us tomorrow. People who have been modest and silent over the past few days will speak up tomorrow in the roundtables. Business community, policy, civil society organizations. I will just start with two remarks. I think we have yesterday come quite a long way in clarifying theoretical, conceptual, and definitional issues. Poverty is, to a considerable extent, a function of marginality. I think was one conclusion. Marginality is understood as being at the edge of social, economic, and ecological systems. And being there at the edges is because of marginalization, which may be driven by discrimination, exclusion, but also perpetuation of being economically depressed and leading to shame and to withdrawal behaviors by individuals or by whole groups. Anyway, today we had this focus on instruments, and the obvious question is to this panel, what has worked? What have you picked up as particularly convincing? Where do you have more questions in the end? Today at this panel we also want to identify key issues which cry for applied research, so that we don't need to repeat discussions on hypotheses forever. I'd like to start with a colleague on my left, Stefan Claassen, University of Göttingen, economist, head of a very interesting poverty research center. Stefan, go ahead. I have asked them 3 minutes, no more.
Okay, thanks very much, and my apologies for just being here this afternoon, because I'm was teaching this morning. I will be teaching tomorrow morning again back in Göttingen. Now, I just want to, when we're talking about the ultra poor and marginality, I think the discussion today has moved quite a lot towards issues of social protection programs. And let me just make 2 or 3 remarks on that, which are also related to my involvement in the European Report on Development this year, which was on social protection in Sub-Saharan Africa. I think one of the things that has come out in some of these discussions this afternoon, and I think that was also one of the findings that we had, is in many places you have too many programs and too little access, particularly for the ultra poor. So I think reducing the size of programs, the number of programs, and increasing their scope is probably a better strategy. And so if you look at countries, we look at Africa, a country like South Africa has 3 or 4 major programs that reach large numbers of the population. Ethiopia is similar. A few major programs that seems to be working much better in terms of access, in terms of administrative feasibility, in terms of control over what is going on, than other countries like Tanzania or Malawi, where you have dozens or sometimes more. And I think the example from Bangladesh was a similar one. So the issue really is fewer seems to be better, because particularly the ultra poor are having problems negotiating access. Second point then is if you then choose which programs to think about, particularly also in terms of marginality, we recommended to start with one program. The one that we chose was social pensions, as that is administratively feasible, quite easy. It has very few disincentive effects. It is fiscally feasible, as has been demonstrated in lots of countries across Africa by now. It has and is politically extremely popular. So it can actually win the support of the population as well as the government. And that can then become a platform and make it near universal. So only exclude the really the wealthy, but don't make it finely targeted to actually get this as a basis going, and then really make sure first that everybody, including the ultra poor and the marginalized, get access to that. And it's much easier to make sure that they get access to such a big, universal, or very lightly targeted program than to negotiate access through a maze of 80 programs with all different eligibility rules and other. Second point on that, on the role of NGOs in that, I think Bangladesh is a unique story. That it's basically the only country in the world where you basically have, which is a very populous country, where you have NGOs working at the level of and the size of government ministries and agencies, and probably delivering programs that are bigger than what the government is able to deliver. In most other countries, we have the NGO sector is a much more fragmented story, which can only deliver things here and there. And I think here I see actually a different role, where NGOs can actually play a much more important role, particularly for the marginalized and the poor, in negotiating access, rather than actually delivering niche programs in little places here and there. Clearly, this might be a controversial point. So let me just stop with these two and to throw out some ideas. Thanks.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you. I just think about how to use the concept that ZEF worked out yesterday to conduct further research, and also made the research useful for policy options. The second day intervention part does not quite closely related to marginalization or the concept work. It's quite separated. So my suggestion is to use those concepts to make a follow-up study on the existing program schemes which are targeting the poorest. And second, to evaluate those intervention, either with the quality of life or poverty alleviation impacts, so on, but related quite with the concept. Otherwise, if without further use of those newly made concept, then the concept is just a picture, like Chinese say, it's bread only in the air. Yes, finish.
Thank you, Zuling. I take that point to heart before I pass on to Joy. I think if I extrapolate from your point, then we should put the big strategic question on the agenda, whether existing programs which sort of address poverty can be or cannot be expanded to sustainably address marginality. That question is a research question, which is phrasing it differently than essentially what you have said. The jury is out there. Joy.
Thank you. Thank you once again. I want to fall back on today's discussions. And some of the key points that came out today is that the poor are diverse. They are diverse in terms of causes, they are diverse in some terms of circumstances, and they are diverse in terms of contexts. And so are the development interventions that are aimed to reach the poor. And each development intervention has got its own characteristics. It has its own capabilities, and it has its own strengths. It may be one development intervention, for example, microfinance, could do very well on the not so badly off or poor, but it may not do very well on the so worse or poor. Social protection can go to the ultra poor because it's all about give them money, let them buy what they need. They should not die of hunger when all of us are eating, you know. Social protection can go down to that depth. And now the point I want to bring forward is that one of different development interventions and collaborators behind and collaboration behind these interventions. There is need for different drivers of this intervention to collaborate to build synergies that can reach everybody at their level. For example, I gave an example of this little village where I was born and brought up and how things are changing. Microfinance is also in my little village. Those who are the better off poor are benefiting a lot. The worse off poor burnt off their fingers and they have sort of stayed away from it. And we've seen the government, the Ministry of Agriculture, the CJR institutions working and improving the varieties of production. That is, microfinance has created the drive for demand for goods and services. The CJR and the Ministry of Agriculture have created the productivity, have improved the productivity. Then now, and a good collaboration would be some social entrepreneurship to come and create the market, probably start some, some bit of processing of these juice and storage and access to markets for this. That way, then social protection will come and reach those who are completely left out simply because they're too old to work in the farms or they're disabled or something like that, so that we're able to reach everybody at their point at a cost-effective way. So the point is collaboration to build synergies among the development interventions that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Look at it, please.
Well, thank you. I also draw from the discussion that took place today and yesterday, but I only focus on today and make 2 points. I think if I look at the discussion, I can summarize the policy issue in 2 parts. To use the terminology used by Martin Pavilion, that I think one set of policy issue came for discussion is the growth related issues. And the second is, given the limitation of the growth in touching the poorest, we talk about the growth plus policies. And the entire discussion then was on various social protection and other measures. Now let me briefly mention you what were the suggestions with respect to growth. I think the environmentally, the poor really concentrated in the environmentally degraded region. The example from African countries came, degraded areas, marginal trace areas, and therefore the case for development of these areas was made so that not only the poor and possibly poorest benefit, but everybody benefits. So I think that is one policy that came for a discussion quite pertinently. But at the same time, also the challenge was with respect to the intensification of production, agriculture technological development, productivity of the livestock sector. So all good focus suggestion came from different speakers. That is one set, and I think we need to discuss that. And the one of the issues that I'll take later on, when there will be issue of what research we should take, is that to what extent these policies of growth based on technology will really, in what situation it will help the ultra poor. The growth plus policies that we recognize the limitation of the growth in helping the poorest, and that came through some of the observation from Indian studies and elsewhere. The growth plus instrument came for discussion. Fiscal policy, microfinance, food security, skill education, cash transfer instrument, employment program, social business, and property right. I think these were all intervention which were suggested by various speakers to address the issues. I think we should discuss about this, their viability and their feasibility to address the issues of the most poor as such. I will throw certain issue for research further later on.
Well, colleagues, this was the first one. Anyone would like to come in? This is the round table. Attack or end. Sudarshan, then Ishan.
Yeah, 2 fairly long days. From my side, I wanted to make a contribution on a couple of dimensions. One is in terms of actual, let's say, program implementation. I think what one picked up over the 2 days is that a holistic approach is kind of required, which allows, which should include at the top a comprehensive and yet a clear policy environment from the state perspective. Number 2, a basket of choices for engagement with the marginal community, and yet, as Stefan mentioned, not an infinite basket, quite plurality, but not infinitely spread thin. And the third thing which I thought also came out fairly kind of clear was that the engagement needs to be over a longer period. It needs to draw over a longer period. So this in terms of programs and implementation. In terms of research focus, I felt one is, I think there is a potential for looking at and drawing out processes which could be evolved from successful experiences that exist already. And the second thing which I thought went understated was in terms of the aspirational aspect of the marginal community. And the third thing is the potential short-term kind of imbalances in the social structure and the fallouts between the what you have been terming as ultra poor, poor, and people just above the margin. So there is a possibility in the enthusiasm to focus purely on the ultra poor to get into, because at the rural community level these boxes are not clearly kind of distinguished that there is a set with whom you can work in isolation with others. So I see a potential turmoil that could be coming in, and I think we need to factor. Based on that, I think we also need to look at the conflict resolution mechanisms that would have to be kind of thought about. And lastly, again, from a research perspective, I think cross-cultural or geopolitical parallels in terms of all the ongoing various initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. It's 2 very interesting days. I think basically 3 points that I would like to re-emphasize. I think the first one is the importance of strategic and overall context. And very little has been said about where countries find themselves in an international perspective. You are in the middle of an oil price shock. You are facing a food price shock, a continuing food price shock. and one is possibly facing yet another shock to trade, which is about to happen, with a layman style default by Greece. So in a sense, what it has is the importance of an overall growth strategy. Of course, international aspects also include opportunities for the poor, including labor markets, on which not very much was said. Labor markets, particularly for African and South Asia, in the Middle East. And then there is internal migration in South Asia, which is extremely important for the poor and the vulnerable. The overall macro context. We started saying something about it, but probably not enough in terms of the overall balance between spending, minimum spending on social programs, and the ability to raise domestic revenues. And the overall financing is important because it affects incentives. It affects non-inflationary spending parts. Again, very, very important for the poor. The way social programs are financed, as I've pointed out from Mexico, affects the extent of informality, to the extent to which you have proper general government revenues and not earmarked payroll taxes. One minimizes the incentives for greater informality. And then, of course, you have greater responsibility at a subnational level, because a lot of these programs are subnational, and in order to get better responsibility and accountability at the subnational level, there is a own revenue-raising agenda at the subnational level, which is a largely virgin area as far as research is concerned, and policy for that matter. Then, of course, there's the organization and design of interventions, and I think there's a clear recognition here that fewer is better. The simpler you can make it, the better. And all this nonsense about detailed criteria and eligibility requirements and asset tests, which are impossible to operate even in developed countries, become really only sources for rent seeking in developing countries. Rent seeking, capture, and clientelism. And indeed, that's, again, the corruption aspects, the diversion of resources. That's something, again, which has not really received very much attention. But the overall incentive structures are important in this, as are the governance structures, particularly the flow of information, the tracking of monies, and also the role that sometimes donors play by making things more difficult. The Afghanistan case, everyone does their own thing. Nobody really knows where the money is going, or who, or what the total spending on social protection or anything else is for that matter. So really, information flows in determining the political economy of capture and colonialism. So I think these three things: the overall context, the macro financing, and the intergovernmental and the governance issue.
Yeah. I'd like us to listen to Akta and then go back to the panel. Stefan, maybe you could react on Etishan, and Professor could maybe react on Sudarshan. Let's see what Akta wants to say.
Okay. What I'd like to say is, I think this is all mostly about targeting that I'll be talking. So targeting is not only targeting the beneficiaries, the people, but first I think targeting or identifying the right type of intervention. And I think right type of intervention should be targeted to human development. And that includes health and nutrition programs and education programs. If I have all the money, I would spend all the money in these two programs only, human development. And target that human development to life cycle of people, say under 2 of the first 1,000 days, that includes pregnant and lactating women and under 2 children. And then the adolescent girls, and then the elderly. So these are probably the, using that life cycle approach. So that's the targeting the program, targeting the, different groups of people. And as I said, human development investment, that is, not only the demand side. I mean, social protection is mainly about the demand side, but that should go hand in hand with the supply side too, for both health programs and education programs, quality of education, teachers, and those things also should be, provided with this type of programs. And then, well, the last one is, I think, I would say for poorest and marginal, that is poorest class, don't just give them money. It's, no pun is intended at Professor David Hume's, but it is much complex. As we have seen that successful programs like this TUP program in Bangladesh, it requires a lot of hand-holding and much more attention to the poor. So we are talking about a small group of people, but they are the most vulnerable. They probably live in very difficult terrains, like a mountainous region in Peru or China or Himalayas. So we have to reach them there. Don't try to bring them rehabilitated somewhere else in the plain. So these are very difficult tasks, but I think that package we have to bring to them, and that package is the human development package. Thank you.
Well,
Okay, let me react to some of the very interesting points here. First, I think I generally am quite in agreement with some of the issues that you've raised. Just to fill in, I think when we're thinking about the macro context and the financing, clearly if one thinks about social protection programs, one needs to make sure not only that the funding is there now, but also is there in the longer term. So you really have to have the right, first the right tax base in order to afford it. What we found in this European Report on Development is there are obviously many in Africa have this, but it's getting better, and with one such a pension program, virtually every African country actually has it costs you 1 and 2% of GDP, but also one of the things that came out is what doesn't well is don't do it when it comes from the outside, because then it's often fiscally not sustainable, administratively not sustainable, and you don't actually have the political and social consensus around doing this. Now on the targeting and the complexity of the programs, I want to nuance it a little bit relative to what you said. I think what we've heard this afternoon is if you have an extremely well-functioning NGO sector, as you do in Bangladesh, you can do things that you can't do anywhere else, which is actually deliver a pretty well-done means test, which is complex, and basically the reason why it works is because it's low cost, because most of the cost is time of low-paid staff and low-paid and very poor people who spend, you spend a day and a half with them on the means test and trying to identify this. This is very hard for a government agency to do, but this is possible for an NGO to do. The other thing with the complexity of the program, if you have a very well-functioning NGO, you can deliver a complex program. But if we're thinking about the normal context of developing countries, that is not Bangladesh, where you don't have such an NGO sector that works to scale at this efficiency, you can't do it this way. And there I'm actually with you that basically then when you're thinking about state-run programs, light targeting, just trying to exclude the most egregious people who shouldn't be beneficiaries, should be the aim rather than fine-tuning it. And also simplicity is important, so that basically people have the sense we have it gives us security, this transfer program will be there for us, it's near universal, I have a right to it, and maybe the NGO sector will help me claim that right if I don't have it. That is going to be the base from which then many other things can flow. Last point, we don't actually know nearly enough on impact. We do a lot of evaluation, but on real impact, we don't know nearly enough. And I think that's partly because we don't experiment enough and do proper evaluations, and partly because we don't assess enough, using proper baselines and possibly randomization or some sort of other ways of trying to study the impact. So I think that's on the research agenda. There's still a lot to be done, particularly if we're thinking about the poorest.
Can I just comment on that very point? It's not only that we don't know about the outcomes. Sometimes when we are focusing on the outcomes, we forget that we don't even know about what was actually spent.
Yeah.
So you need to know what was spent, when, and where the money went, and only then will this focus on outcomes make any sense.
Stefan, you said earlier too many programs. We had listened to a presentation from Bangladesh, 80 programs. It sounds sort of convincing, but there may, or that there are too many. 80 directors general, 80 boards, 80 offices, and so on. But on the other hand, we are dealing with a complex problem. Mozart, when he had presented his magic flute for the first time, was accused of too many notes. Have you done research on what's the optimal number of programs in a certain setting? Or is that sort of gut feeling, too many notes?
Well, I think basically, no. This is obviously, we're getting closer to the Beethoven here, so I better speed up. I think basically what we've learned is the more distant you are from the people you are trying to target, the harder it is, complexity gets harder. And so basically also, that just basically also means there's a limit to what the government can do, but it should do precisely this, which is provide some sort of basic flow with one or two simple, secure, safe, sustainable programs that, and then as capacity increases within governments and possibly outside of government, because one of the options, of course, that the government can do is a contract with private sector, for example, to deliver services if it isn't able to do it themselves. One can actually move up the complexity ladder. So a country like Chile has very complex social protection programs and delivers all of them pretty well. Of course, here in Germany we have a ton of social protection programs, and they're delivered reasonably well. And but this is a matter of trade-offs. We need more. Yes, ideally we need a lot more, but can we do a lot more? That's really the question.
Could I see signs of hand? Who would like to speak? Ulrich, Ruth. Okay. Remember Beethoven. From now on, the 1 minute rule applies, so that we can get out. And then I postpone coming back to the panel. Ulrich.
3 very short points for the research agenda. First, I would suggest that we look much more intensively at the experience in Latin America, in particular Brazil and Mexico. The programs applied there seem to have been relatively successful with respect to hardcore poverty, and I think there's a lot to gain from taking a closer look at that. Number 2, the point of cost effectiveness has not been addressed in any depth in the discussion. We've just towards the end, it was mentioned for one single program. I think that needs to be tackled in the context of scarce resources, and when alternative programs are available, cost effectiveness should be one criterion for selection. Finally, I have some doubts whether targeting is really what we need. You want to do programs for the ultra poor and bypass the poor? Is that really what you want? I doubt it. I think we need program packages for the poor which have components which particularly address the needs of ultra poor. But I don't think you can do programs for the ultra poor and nothing else.
Thank you. 1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute. We had a very good discussion in the last 2 days, and they were quite rich. But one aspect, again, I would like to reinforce and highlight once again, that in any design of the policy intervention for alleviation of extreme poor or chronic poor, dependence of the poor on the CPR, what Ruth has also highlighted, and the ecosystem services should not be ignored. That will be a big failure, a big mistake. We know we are in the group of conventional economists here, but there are plenty of examples. I mean, no way I want to convey the message that the kind of poor you have in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia, that can be removed just by maintaining biodiversity and wildlife. No way. You need mainstream intervention. But in larger, whether it is South Asia, a large part of population, they are depending upon mangroves. 24 Parganas, south in Midnapur in Indian Banga, same is true for Bangladesh. People depend upon the prawn seeds from the fishing. Similarly for Rajasthan, foothills of Himalaya. What I'm trying to highlight, and these CPRs are being linked with the market, so these guys are being denied the access. So their nutritional content.
Hold it there.
Yeah. Just basically, so they are linked with the market, and their ownership is being taken away. That is creating the problem. So if that aspect is not given prominence.
Time is doubled.
Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you. Bruce?
Word I haven't heard is pastoralists. I was a little surprised to hear that there's no ethnic discrimination in Ethiopia, but also that pastoralists are, all the costs of delivering services are higher in these cases. These are marginal people, and even just basic sanitation services. All of this, and I think that's something that we really need to bring back onto the table.
Okay. Neil?
I want to return back to something we started with the first day, and that is rural development. I haven't heard much mention of rural development today, and it almost seems that we assume that growth will not help the ultra poor. And so, particularly tomorrow, I would hope we return to the necessity to invest in rural development, not only in terms of helping farmers to be more productive, increasing productivity of food so that prices stay low, but also rural industrialization, because we won't solve the ultra-poor problem without a significant rural industrialization.
Yeah, thank you for reminding us. It's so important. We haven't had a study on the table, except in the talk from you, Prabhu, that identified whether or not the extreme rural poor are embraced positively by agricultural growth. But we have so much evidence historically that it works. Probably you are.
So, it's something that's been bothering me a little bit all afternoon as we talked about safety nets, and now the discussion just now has been more on programs and how to promote programs through governments or through non-governmental agencies, etc. But as a private foundation, we get lectured non-stop by especially the European governments that we should not be doing program funding, we should only be doing budget support, and we should be faithful to the Paris Declaration and all of that. Now, if we take that to be true, then much of the discussion that you're having this afternoon on supporting specific safety net programs are things that should come out of government budgets to do that work. And governments have to make the decision to put their money into these programs and not donors telling them to do it. Now, once you do that, then the government has a real trade-off issue. How much of money should you put into a safety net program relative to how much money you should put into a productivity enhancement, growth enhancement program? And I don't think we are addressing the real trade-off there and the political economy around that trade-off.
I have Andres, and I would like to try to close the list unless there's somebody angry with me if I do so. Of course, the panelists have a chance. Who is angry then? Signs of angriness? 1, 2. Okay, we work with that anger list. Are you angry if I cut you off, Andres?
At least mildly.
Go ahead. Well,
my point has already been made about the essential importance of putting growth at the center of this and not leaving it to social protection programs to mop up the extreme poor. So that I don't need to go into great detail about that. But the trade-offs are not just about for every dollar you spend on social protection, it's money you can't allocate, for example, to economic productivity. We need to put social protection in the broader fiscal picture and look at the enormous social protection that goes towards the rich. In South Africa, for example, tax breaks for provision for private medical aid is many times, or several times, the provision for disability social protection, or even for the proposed national insurance health scheme. And that puts a slightly different picture on the trade-offs. We need to stop seeing the marginally poor as something that's dealt with by the margins of social policy and growth policy. We need to put it at the center.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of good discussion about social protection programs and getting the design of these right. One concern that I have is that if you set up this safety net, there's a danger that people get caught in the net. And somehow there needs to be, I think, a ladder that extends far enough down that people who are caught by the net can climb their way out. And maybe this is where the role of some of the social enterprise, the microfinance, rural development plays an important role.
Okay. Imran?
I got a bit confused towards the end of today's session, where I think I thought we're really talking about poverty reduction, approaches to poverty reduction for the marginalized and the poorest of the poor, rather than the safety net social protection agenda as such. I mean, both one can feed off the other. The platform of social protection in the way, Stefan, that you described can be used obviously as a platform for poverty reduction program, but two are different things. And in that sense, what I was describing in my presentation, the ultra poor program, is essentially a poverty reduction program for the ultra poor. And the IGBGD program that BRAC had before with WFP, if you like, is more like IGBGD being a platform on which BRAC built a poverty reduction program for the ultra poor. So I think there's some clarity we need to have there in terms of having the conversation going forward.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. That also relates to one of Ulrich's points. I have not heard that targeting in this meeting means targeting the ultra poor at the expense of the dollar-a-day poor. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that the point of education was really not mentioned clear enough. So I think if we talk about marginalization and overcoming extreme poverty in the long run, this is one of the central sectors. And I mean, how to bring the children in the schools and how to ensure that they really complete the full primary education and go to secondary schools. I think this is one of the key points, was what we all agree, but it was hardly mentioned up to now.
Last anger management point, Sudarshan.
I'm hoping that I won't create more anger rather than subside it. I was just wondering as an afterthought whether, the context that government and state, I think, is one of the major creator and perpetuator of marginality, and therefore looking constantly up to them and instruments through them, are we kind of, putting too many stakes in a context which is, where the originator is there. So I just wanted to park that with you people.
I'd like to ask my colleagues not to try to answer all these questions. I mean, the idea was that we reflect, have a moment of reflection at the end of day 2. With the end of this day, we are 75% there in terms of time covered for the conference. So, as the last mile or the last quarter is so important, let's not get into the idea that we settle everything today. There's tomorrow. Rather, I'd like to ask to reflect on reflections. Zuling, there were points regarding targeting, getting caught in safety nets. So doubts about some of the issues which have been discussed today. Anything you would like to reflect on these reflections?
Perhaps I reflected to Dr. Ahmed, and then because he raised the questions also, some of them repeat also. It's about the right type of targeting. My understanding that you raised question how to tailor your intervention to the specific needs of the poorest. So we cannot just say generally targeting to the school, that the experience of us, the school group is an interest group. They got targeted money, but doesn't necessarily to meet the needs of the poorest. So I give only one example. That means that better targeted with the tailored program to the specific needs of the poorest.
Since it is a reflection, I would only make 2 points. I think we will have to deal the issue not growth versus state intervention in the form of various program. There are certain areas where the state-sponsored programs are necessary. I understand that because there are limitations of private sector. But I personally believe that the growth and growth plus strategy is a key thing to the problem of poverty, and even for that matter, the issue of ultra poor. Now, I think what we will have to, we must address one of the issues for this discussion is what is the kind of inclusive growth? What are those elements of inclusive growth which will also help to the extent possible to be not only to the poor but also the poorest in the process of growth. And you might be aware that the debate that began with Martin Trevelyan and went down to Kakak Nakwani and others, where they try to identify that what constitutes inclusive growth which will also help the poor. So building the space for the poor in the growth process itself is an issue which we will have to discuss. Second, notwithstanding that whatever inclusive growth, yet certain section of society, the poorest of the poor for whatever reason, will, some section at least, which are not income related but still they will remain outside the growth process. There is no choice except the government comes in the play. If private sector wants to come, most of them come. So please don't discourage the state government. The state will have to come to public health system, state will have to come to public education system, and infrastructure and road. So I think we will have to deal with this issue of inclusive growth for further research, as well as what kind of schemes, programs are really needed for the poorest of the poor. Thank you.
Because at the time, it was still a problem dealing with, I don't want to say corruption because it sounds rude, but controlling who really should be in those registers. Some people did not exist on the ground, but they were receiving money every month. Remember, this is a very small thing, yet these things are happening. And because of that, we find that now the donors they have assumed some bit of autonomy of their resources, and the word they're using is that our accountability standards do not comply with your government's accountability standards. So you find that these are the donors who want to support the same government, but they're sort of they're running the show on the side, and it's a big confusion. The government is putting money in it, and there are still issues. Now, I am a daughter born and brought up in a marginalized area in every sense. If you asked me, if you told me there's 10 million pounds of Atenia or rather, because if you took 120, it's about 10 million per year. In Kenya, we have about 8 provinces. Define that per year and ask me, should we pay the poor, or what do you think would have a bigger impact? Perhaps I would come up with ideas, which I think, for me, I would say we need water to irrigate. For me, I would want to say that. So the point I am making is, I think it's not just realigning interests with governments only, but also with those whom we want to serve. How best can we serve you? It's not about thinking and imposing solutions on us. Perhaps that should be explored through research, whether it can really be done and the complexities therein. Thank you.
Yes, just a few last points here. First, I think the bias this afternoon was on social protection programs. Of course, any long-term strategy that will overcome ultra poverty will have to be something related to growth, because and making sure that the poorest are included. That there are issues of infrastructure, issues of productivity. Basically, markets work very badly for them, and there are a whole bunch of areas where we can directly intervene. On this trade-off issue, yes, of course, that's exactly the issue that you described. I think, and the interesting thing, however, is that in African countries, as well as in other countries, governments are making these decisions differently than they have in the past. In Ethiopia, they're putting in quite a lot of resources on the productive safety net program. In South Africa, they're putting a lot of money on social pensions, and Lesotho and Swaziland, and the political support is quite high. So I think that is interesting that actually there is a consensus building around this. And these programs are, I think, as Andres has pointed out, if you think about first kind of stopping the old style social protection programs, which are basically protecting formal sector workers, there's a lot of resources around that can be used. The role of the state, last point, I think yes, in many places we don't have a functioning state, and we will not and in some places, again, I think Bangladesh is one, where the non-state sector works a lot better than the state sector. But I think we can't really picture, I think, long-term development, including for the ultra-poor, without actually building up state capacity in the process. So I think just forgetting about the state is not a solution. The state has to be there front and center, and if it isn't there now, it should be there in the future.
Thank you. Let me add my minute of reflections, not summing up. 4 points. One is, what I hope we get tomorrow further is insights on which interventions and incentives reduce marginality and thereby extreme poverty most effectively. The effectiveness question, Ulrich mentioned that. Secondly, given the complexity, we must simplify. But what are common entry points to address the issue of extreme poverty and marginality? And for me, there is an obvious one: food and agriculture, given the high budget shares to food which these people consume and their jobs. 3, I hope tomorrow we get at how can involvement and collaboration among agents of change, including business, improve to implement interventions at scale for and with the marginalized poor. So how to get these agents together. 4th, I think we need to pay more attention to dynamics. The volatility issues, the shocks, Etisham, you mentioned them. finance oil, food. We've just done a little study on what explains volatility. And it's actually the production shocks, the energy shocks and the financial shocks, which explain a lot of the volatility in prices. But what connects to you, Tom, is if we look at the 11 countries from where we have nutrition data for the last few years, the child malnutrition data either jumped up or left their declining, improving trend, the undernutrition, in 8 of them. And that has long-term implications. That puts more people into the marginalized who cannot demarginalize themselves. So we have to look at the long-term consequences of shocks for human resources and the creation of marginality. That brings us back to macro. So, sound interventions, collaboration, dealing with aggregation and with shocks. Have a good evening. Thank you, panelists.